All right, good morning. Today is November 17th, 2021, and I'm back with another edition of the Wednesday live show. And let's see, 1 week from today is a day before Thanksgiving. So I expect things will probably slow down a little bit by this time next week. And then obviously I believe the markets open on Friday after Thanksgiving, which probably be a really dull day, but so we're headed into the holiday season and one of my favorite times of the year. Of course, it's beautiful and sunny here and in the 70s, so can't beat that. The market's been holding up pretty well. There's a lot going on. We actually have a few pending trades. We have the one pending trade that's been in there for quite some time now, and we'll take a look at that, and we'll take a look at a couple others that have hit the list, and depending on what the market does, I expect maybe a few more will pop in. It's kind of interesting that nothing's getting triggered in here, so it's kind of interesting. The market, it's a strange market. It's very sort of well, I don't know how to describe it, but let me show you what I have here. So, on the S&P 500 here, kind of taking a zoomed in look. I've seen a lot of people on the internet drawing this line, so I thought I would recreate it myself. But basically, you can see where it's kind of uncanny when you have a trend line like this across the highs from April and the beginning of September. Actually, yeah, it's right around the end of October, beginning of September. But anyway, you can see it's kind of interesting to see that this rally and this rally that we saw here in October was extraordinary. It was really kind of out of the blue. The market had been acting pretty weak and choppy and all that, and then once it basically, broke that downtrend line. I have a different chart with the downtrend line. Once it broke that downtrend line, crossed back above the 50-day moving average, then it was just off to the races, and we got this, you know, sort of a parabolic move, which stopped literally right at the trend line drawn across the previous couple of highs, which is kind of interesting. And so now, market's hanging in there really well, obviously, but looking a little bit vulnerable. It'll be interesting to see how this sort of pattern resolves. And keep in mind, as I've been mentioning, that we're in the seasonally strongest part of the year too. So that's one thing the market does have going in its favor. So right now we're kind of in a consolidation phase, right? Haven't really given much back. I mean that was a couple of percent off the highs there, that pullback, and then just when it looks like things are getting toppy, then the market has a way of sort of. I want to take a look at the weekly there. Yeah, that weekly candle or the weekly bar last week was kind of portended a little bit of a pullback, but we haven't seen anything so far this week. As you can see right here, we're just basically sort of hanging out. Let's take a look at the SPY because that SPY gives a little bit better of a picture. So, yeah, you can see that the highs here for the past 3 weeks are basically just sort of. I mean, I could almost draw a horizontal line across it. So, but basically, the same high for the past 3 weeks here. So it's going to be interesting to see. Usually, when I'm looking at something like this, the thing that I look for, and this is keep in mind this is a weekly chart, is either a break above the highs from the previous week or a break below the lows. And so we're basically still on an inside week here. So it could go either way. Switch back to a daily chart here. So there you go. I mean, the S&P had this huge run up, and it's interesting that SPY, yesterday's bar, basically, was right back at the high, but the SPX is well, I guess it's pretty darn close to the high. Not quite, but pretty close. So got a slightly lower high there. It'll be interesting to see what happens from here. Um, let's look at the NASDAQ. Seems like a lot of the actions in the NASDAQ. The latest thing, obviously, if you've been paying attention, is that the electric cars, the electric car stocks are going crazy, right? You had this Rivian go public, and it's got an incredible market cap. I think it's well, I don't even know, but it's ridiculous. They have no sales. They haven't produced any cars, but the market cap is like more than Volkswagen or something like that. So, um, and yeah, so I mean everything. Let's see. Here it is. Rivian, yeah, IPO'd and just went reminiscent of the dot-com days. And then there's this Lucid, which has gone crazy too, right? So, and you can see, the I remember like when the electric cars were the hot sector, back here. I think there was one Neo, there's another one. This one's not really getting the pump this time around, which is kind of interesting, but and then of course you got Tesla, right? And Tesla's a whole story in and of itself, but it made this parabolic move, which had to be like sort of a short squeeze type thing, right? Because I mean, it went up 30% in just a couple of weeks. And then, of course, Elon Musk sold a bunch of stock right here. And so, anyway, it's this is a real battleground sort of stock here. Very interesting. But getting back to the Nasdaq, the Nasdaq 100, of course, is comprised of these mega cap stocks, heavily weighted in a handful of mega cap stocks. It's holding on real well. Nice uptrend. A little bit of a pullback here, but one or two decent sessions away from an all-time high. Small caps typically, let me go back to here we go, IWM. Small caps typically strong this time of the year, especially, right around Thanksgiving, in between Thanksgiving and Christmas and the New Year. So now would actually be a pretty decent time for a little bit of a retrenchment and a pullback. So I'm noticing some issues with the live show. So fortunately, this is being recorded, and most everyone watches this on the recording anyway. So I'll just keep going here. Yeah, ideally a pullback to the top of this box where it broke out, where it should find some support, would probably be good this time of the year to set the small caps up for an even bigger rally later in the year. The proverbial Santa Claus rally. Although, hey, you never know. Everyone is, I gotta say, the complacency in the overall market, the speculation in the overall market, the idea that the Fed's not going to let anything happen. The market's probably the most historically valued by. Well, I know there's quite a few metrics that show the market is as richly valued as it's ever been, right? The Shiller PE, the Buffett indicator, all that, market cap to GDP, all these different like macro type of things are flashing warning signs, but that doesn't mean necessarily that it's gonna matter in the short term. However, very reminiscent. A lot of what's going on is just reminiscent of the old dot-com days, which I remember to some degree. And it's just like the old saying goes, you gotta dance while the music's still playing. So, but I'm I'm pretty cautious here. Cautious sort of in the longer term because I know that I know that, eventually something's going to happen that's going to start a sell-off, and it could be a pretty brutal sell-off. Now, of course, you got really high inflation. The Fed, I don't think really knows what they're going to do, because they know that if the Fed gets aggressive and clamps down, gets hawkish, clamps down on easy money, that the market's going to tank, and so they've painted themselves into a corner, right? And they keep claiming that inflation is transitory, and they've been claiming that since they claimed that there was no inflation when clearly prices were rising and everybody saw it. They claimed there's no inflation, and then they were all worried about getting inflation to their 2% goal, and now inflation's running about 5-6%, and that's being generous based on CPI. In real life, everybody sees shrinkflation at the grocery store and prices rising and that type of thing. So anyway, the macro environment's in a pretty big mess, and you got all this crazy speculation going on, and basically, everybody thinks the Fed is going to come to the rescue no matter what, and of course they have in the past, and they're blaming everything on the pandemic, obviously, which may be getting worse this time of year too, and you're seeing different countries going back on lockdown and high COVID rates and all this. So, I mean, the macro environment is a true mess, yet the perception is that the market doesn't care, or it's not going to care, but it may matter at some point. So I think that it could be a kind of a rough year next year. It's interesting. I think Goldman expects the S&P to trade up over 5,000 next year, and J.P. Morgan's expecting it to be a down year. So it's kind of interesting. Anyway, so let's take a quick look through the pending stocks. It's kind of interesting that none of these have actually triggered in yet, right? Especially, let me find J&J on my list here. So this one's been pending for, a couple of months maybe, since 9/27. So it's been a while. Back over here, but big scheme of things, it's carving out a pretty nice base here, and there's been several pokes actually over the trigger line, but no close over the trigger line. Now I'm not sure. I believe this might have been their earnings release. I'm not positive about that. So we're pretty much through earnings season, so that's a positive. But you can see what's happening here. Big sell down, and then that little sort of extra sell off that would have knocked out anybody that was trying to get long here. And then it's managed to form sort of a nice little cup here, right? And like I say, there's been a couple of forays over the trigger line, but no close over it. And so basically a close over the trigger line is sort of the confirmation we use for the entry, right? So theoretically, it's going to continue to carve out a base and then slowly turn up and rally, sort of, on a lot of stock charts that I look at, basically like the current pattern is just a bigger version of a previous pattern. Maybe something like this, one of these other cups, but it's pretty easy to visualize this thing starting to cup up and then trading back higher. But for the time being, it's hanging in there pretty well. It's just not getting, not quickly turning the corner here, right? It looked like it was going to turn the corner here recently and sold back down a little bit, but that's fine. So